In today's video, I'm taking an outdated 80s pie safe and transforming it into a coffee bar for my client. This simple DIY project can be done by anyone who wants to breathe some new life into some of their furniture. Follow along for all the steps, starting from stripping the piece, sanding, painting, and adding wax. And I actually have a fail, and I'm going to show you what I did to correct it. Hi, I'm Jacqueline. Welcome to my channel. I chose to use citrus strip in order to strip the top of the cabinet. Since the top of the cabinet had lots of paint and some raised dots, I thought, well, let's strip it and then I will sand it. I'm spreading the citrus strip with a chippy brush, but you can also use a foam brush. As I wanted to leave the citrus strip on the cabinet overnight, I decided to use some plastic wrap and place it over top. That way the citrus strip would not dry out. Okay, this is after 17 hours. Let's see what this looks like. As you can see, there's still lots of paint, but I believe the top layer of the paint and the textured areas have been removed. And now I'm going to use a palette knife to scrape away the residue from the citrus strip. I'm using Wise Owl Greenez Strip and Clean to remove the residue of the citrus strip. You can also use mineral spirits or simple green all-purpose cleaner, or maybe some odorless paint thinner. I'm using a little scrubby pad, but you can also use a steel wool to remove the citrus strip residue, as long as the steel wool is a fine grade steel wool like 0000 grade. And I just keep working at it just until the residue is all removed. While the cabinet is drying, I am removing the wooden handle from the drawer, and it will not be reused as new hardware will be added. To clean the cabinet, I'm using Fusion TSP Alternative, but you can use a mild detergent, or if you have any simple green, that works great. I then add water to a rag and wipe away, and then I let the piece dry before the next step. I remove the hinges and the knob from the little door. Now that the cabinet was totally dry, I use a 120 grit sandpaper to sand the top and the rest of the cabinet. Since this cabinet is made out of pine, which is softwood, there were quite a few dings and chips, so I decided to use Bondo Filler. I mixed some hardener to the filler and gave it a good mix. And when you're using Bondo, you need to act quickly as it hardens pretty fast. Once the filler was completely dried, then I sanded it off. The little cabinet door had a wire mesh on the back of it, so I decided to remove it, and I used my heavy-duty staple remover. And this is such a great tool. It doesn't gouge the wood, and I will put a link below in case you're interested. The cabinet is now ready for its next step. I decided to prime the cabinet since I could still see some of the folk art paint and there were some knots in the wood. So I'm using the Zinsser Bin Primer, and as you can see, I'm going outside to do the spraying. Time to paint. So I'm using Fusion in the color Plaster, and this paint will match my client's existing cabinet. I will be applying 2 coats of the plaster to the cabinet, and I'm also using the Dixie OM brush. You may notice while I'm painting that I'm constantly wiping away the edges of the drawer or the cabinet. And this is because I don't want to have any drips. And if the drips are not caught and they dry out, they get pretty hard and they're harder to remove. After the first coat of paint, there were a few more spots that needed to be filled in. And then I proceeded to use a fine sanding sponge and sanded the entire piece before applying the second coat of paint. For the inside and outside of the little drawer, I decided to go with a different color. This time I went with Algonquin by Fusion Mineral Paint. Here's a little tip for you. I use a press and seal to use on my brushes in between painting so the brush doesn't dry out. And I also add it to the top of my jars. That way it's easier to remove the lids. I decided to paint underneath the cabinet since some of the wood will be visible from a distance. So I decided to go with the Algonquin paint on the underside as well. Before going into the next step for the top of the cabinet, I'm using a fine sanding sponge just to remove any little paint nibs and wiping it down. For the top of the cabinet, I'm going to be applying Fusion Mineral Paint Stain and Finishing Oil in a cappuccino, and I'm using this sponge in order to apply it. It needs a good stir in order to get all the product that's at the bottom of the jar. You can use a brush or an applicator pad in order to apply this stain. Once you're happy with the amount of stain that you have on your cabinet, then you go back in and you start wiping back. And here I'm using a shop cloth. When applying this product over Fusion paint, you need to remove the excess stain immediately. Otherwise, if it was on raw wood, you can wait after 15 to 20 minutes. But in this case, because I painted the cabinet with the plaster paint, I needed to start removing it immediately. And according to the product, you can recoat after 9 hours. Now, this is where my fail came into play. I removed the excess right away, as you see here, and then I let it dry overnight, and then for another night, and it simply was not drying. So I could not put a second coat. So in the end, I decided to wipe off all of the gel stain, and then I applied clear wax and some brown wax, and this is the result of the top. And I love this result. Now the best thing you should really do is add some of your wax into a plate or another container. That way you don't contaminate your jar, especially with the clear wax. But since it's almost done, I'm not going to worry about it.
Appalachian sunrise meets my skin. Even with my eyes still closed, I can feel it coming in. Golden, golden, I'll follow only golden, 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 golden things. Mountain laurel high fives for miles in spring.
Now to apply dark wax. And I don't need too much wax, just a little bit. And I'm going to take a little bit off of my brush. That's a big difference already. I'm using the Dixie Belle Best Dang Brown Wax. One of the reasons we're doing this, making this cabinet a little bit darker, it's going to match, or at least we're going to try to make it match, another piece of furniture that my client has in her home. And of course I would repeat this process on the sides of the cabinet. Now I'm going to remove some of the dark wax. I'm just wiping it back. So when you're doing this, you just want to make sure there's no, what we call a line of demarcation. So a definite stop and go. So you want to make it look, you know, fairly smooth. Even though it's got a little bit of textured look to it. So I'm just going to continue wiping off a little bit more. Going in the direction of the wood grain. One of the nice things to work with wax is once I think I'm satisfied, I'm going to send my client a photo and ask her if she is satisfied or if she wants it lighter or darker. Now, if she wants it darker, no problem. I'll just add more of the brown wax. If she wants it a little bit lighter, no problem. I can use some of the clear wax, put it on my rag, and wipe the dark wax off a little bit more. Oh, I think that's pretty good. I'm going to show you the door, which hasn't been waxed yet. There you go. So you can tell this is freshly painted, and now the rest of it looks like it's aged. So of course I'm going to do the same thing for the door. And I think it looks pretty cool. Oh, one last thing. This is my favorite buffing brush. It's the Pink Dixie buff brush. I love it. So now that I've removed most of the wax, I'm going to buff it with my Buffy. Or my Buff. Actually, it's called Buff. Makes it nice and shiny. Not too shiny, but it gives it a nice shine.
Meets my skin. Even with my eyes still closed, I can feel it coming. Golden, I'll follow from golden.
And here it is, all done. I hope this DIY cabinet makeover inspires you to tackle your own transformation. If you have any questions about this transformation, please leave me a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any upcoming DIY projects. Thanks for watching. Until next time, check out this video to see the transformation of this china cabinet into a chic boutique.